Ambassador Minho felt his stomach drop as the transport ship touched down on Veltar Prime. He had been to dozens of alien worlds, but nothing prepared him for this place. The entire landing platform looked like it was carved from a single massive diamond. Rainbow light bounced everywhere, making his eyes water. "Welcome to our world, human diplomat," said a tall figure approaching him. The creature's skin was pale blue, almost translucent, and seemed to glow softly in the light of the twin suns overhead. This had to be one of the Therians he'd read about in the briefing files. Minho straightened his formal diplomatic jacket and walked down the ramp. A whole group of Therians waited for him, all standing perfectly still like statues. They wore flowing robes that seemed to be made of the same crystal material as their buildings. Each one looked more important than the last, with elaborate jewelry and ceremonial masks. But one figure caught his attention immediately. Standing slightly behind the others was a young Therian woman. Unlike the rest, she wasn't standing perfectly straight. Her violet eyes kept looking down at the ground, and her hands were shaking as she held some kind of electronic tablet. While her family members looked like they were posing for a portrait, she looked genuinely nervous. "I am Prince Velhan, eldest son of King Thelos," announced the tallest Therian. His voice was formal and cold. "This is Princess Aralyn, my youngest sister." The nervous princess gave a small bow but didn't speak. Minho noticed she seemed different from her siblings. Where they appeared confident and proud, she looked almost scared. The ceremony continued with long speeches about trade and cooperation between their worlds. Minho had attended dozens of these formal events, and they all felt the same. Lots of fancy words, but nobody really saying anything important. Later that evening, they moved to a grand hall for the welcome feast. The room was incredible, with walls that seemed to be made of pure light. Floating crystals provided gentle illumination, and the tables were set with dishes Minho had never seen before. He sat at the main table with the other important guests, trying to make polite conversation about shipping routes and mineral rights. The food was strange but not unpleasant, and the Therian wine made his head feel slightly fuzzy. That's when Princess Aralyn appeared beside his chair. She had somehow moved from the royal table to his spot, without anyone noticing. Up close, he could see that her hands were still trembling, and her violet eyes kept darting around the room, like she was worried someone might stop her. "Human," she whispered, her voice so quiet he had to lean closer to hear. "There's something I need from you." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Every conversation in the hall stopped. Therian nobles turned to stare, their expressions shocked. Some even stood up from their seats, as if they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Minho realized he had just witnessed something that never happened in Therian culture. A princess had just broken every rule of proper behavior by approaching a foreign diplomat directly. The silence in the room was so complete, he could hear his own heartbeat. Princess Aralyn's eyes met his for just a moment, and he saw something there that surprised him. It wasn't just nervousness, it was desperation. Minho couldn't sleep. The princess's whispered words kept echoing in his mind. After tossing and turning for hours, he finally gave up and decided to take a walk through the palace grounds. The Therian palace gardens were unlike anything he'd ever seen. Strange plants with crystalline leaves caught starlight and threw it back in soft, colorful patterns. The air smelled sweet, like flowers mixed with something he couldn't identify. Pathways made of smooth stone wound between pools of water that seemed to glow from within. He was admiring a tree whose branches looked like they were made of silver when he heard footsteps behind him. "I hoped you would come here," said a familiar voice. Minho turned to see Princess Aralyn approaching, but she looked completely different now. Gone was the nervous, trembling girl from the feast. She walked with purpose, her violet eyes alert and focused. Behind her walked another human, a woman Minho recognized from his diplomatic team. "This is Sojin," Aralyn said, gesturing to the other human. "She has been teaching me your language for months." Sojin stepped forward with a slight bow. "Ambassador, Princess Aralyn requested my help as a translator, though her English has improved remarkably." Minho felt confused. "You've been learning our language, but why would you need a secret translator when your people have universal translation devices?" Aralyn's expression grew serious. "Because some things are too important to trust to machines. And what I must tell you cannot be overheard by anyone else. She led them to a secluded area where crystal formations created natural walls around a small clearing. The princess sat on a bench carved from white stone and gestured for Minho to sit across from her. "Our star is dying," she said simply. The words hit Minho like a physical blow. "What do you mean, dying?" "Our scientists discovered it 3 months ago," Aralyn continued, her voice steady, but her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "Deep core instability. Solar flares are increasing. The radiation output is becoming erratic. Our best calculations give us 2 years before complete collapse." So Jin leaned forward. "Ambassador, I've seen their data. It's legitimate. Their entire solar system will become uninhabitable." Minho felt his mind racing. "But surely your people have evacuation plans, ships to relocate your population." Aralyn let out a bitter laugh. "You don't understand Therian culture. We are taught from birth that accepting help from others is the greatest shame possible. My father announced to the High Council that our people would face this crisis with dignity and self-reliance." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means he would rather watch our entire civilization die than ask another species for assistance," Aralyn said, and for the first time her voice cracked slightly. "He calls it maintaining our honor, I call it suicide." Minho stared at her. "That's why you approached me tonight. You're trying to find another way." The princess nodded. "I have studied your people for years, Ambassador. Humans face impossible situations and somehow find solutions. You survived ice ages, built cities in deserts, even learned to live in space. When faced with extinction, you adapt, you innovate. You refuse to give up." As she spoke, Minho noticed something fascinating. Tiny patches of Aralyn's skin began to glow softly, creating delicate patterns of light across her arms and face. It was beautiful and completely unconscious. "Your bioluminescent markings," Sojin whispered. "They're responding to hope." Aralyn looked down at her glowing skin with surprise. "I hadn't realized. It only happens when I feel strong emotions." She looked back at Minho. "Your people don't just solve problems. You help others solve their problems too, but you do it in ways that don't feel like charity. You make partnerships. You find mutual benefit. You make everyone feel strong." Minho was beginning to understand. "You need us to help save your world, but in a way that doesn't shame your people." "Exactly, but Ambassador, I must warn you. If my father discovers what I'm doing, it will be considered treason. And if we fail—" She paused, her glowing markings flickering like dying stars. "If we fail, my people die, and I will have betrayed everything I was raised to believe." The next morning, Minho called an emergency meeting with his team in their assigned quarters. The room was smaller than what they were used to on human ships, but the crystal walls provided perfect privacy from Therian listening devices. "We have a problem," Minho announced as engineer Hyunwoo and cultural specialist Ji Young gathered around the table. "A big one." He explained everything Princess Aralyn had told him the night before. Both team members listened with growing concern as he described the dying star and the Therian refusal to accept outside help. 2 years? Hyunwoo ran his hands through his hair. "That's not much time to evacuate an entire planet, even if they wanted to." Ji Young was already pulling up files on her tablet. "This explains a lot about their behavior patterns. I need to dig deeper into their cultural background." For the next several days, the team worked around the clock. Hyunwoo studied Therian technology records, trying to understand their capabilities and limitations. Ji Young interviewed Therian citizens, carefully asking questions about their history and values without revealing the real reason for her interest. What they discovered was both fascinating and frustrating. "Their entire society is built around the concept of never owing anyone anything," Ji Young explained during one of their evening briefings. "It goes back thousands of years to when they were a collection of warring tribes. The only way to survive was complete self-reliance." Minho leaned back in his chair. "So asking for help isn't just embarrassing for them. It's literally against everything they believe." "Worse than that," Ji Young continued. "I spoke with several historians today. Any leader who accepted assistance from outsiders was traditionally exiled or even executed. They call it soul betrayal." Hyunwoo looked up from his technical analysis. From an engineering standpoint, they're actually quite advanced. Their crystal technology is incredible, but they've never developed large-scale space travel because they never needed to leave their world. Until now, Minho said grimly. Their investigation was interrupted when Princess Aralyn appeared at their door one evening. She had somehow managed to slip away from her royal duties again, though this time she looked less nervous and more determined. "I want to show you something," she said, producing a small device from her robes. The device projected a holographic display that filled their entire room. Images flickered past, showing scenes from Earth's history. But these weren't the usual diplomatic files that most aliens received. These were detailed studies of human resilience and adaptation. "The Dust Bowl of the 1930s, Aralyn narrated as images of struggling farmers appeared. "Your people faced massive crop failures and drought. Instead of abandoning the land, they developed new farming techniques and turned the disaster into an opportunity to build better agricultural systems." More images flowed past. Humans rebuilding after earthquakes, developing new technologies after wars, creating underwater cities when coastal areas flooded due to climate change. "The London Fire of 1666, she continued. "Your ancestors didn't just rebuild the same city, they made it better, with wider streets and improved safety systems." Minho watched in amazement as the princess displayed an incredibly detailed understanding of human history. "Where did you get all this information?" "I've been studying your species for 6 years, Aralyn replied. "At first it was just curiosity. Most aliens see humans as young and reckless, but the more I learned, the more I realized you have something special." "What's that?" Ji Young asked. Aralyn's bioluminescent markings began to glow softly. "You don't just survive disasters. You use them to become stronger. When other species face extinction, they fight or flee or accept death. Humans look at extinction and say, 'How can we make this work for us instead?'" She gestured to another image showing the first human space colonies. "When your world became overcrowded, you didn't fight wars over resources. You built new homes among the stars. When diseases threatened your people, you didn't just treat the sick. You eliminated the diseases entirely." Hyunwoo was staring at the projections with new understanding. "You're saying we turn problems into solutions?" "More than that," Aralyn said, her eyes bright with excitement. "You make everyone around. You believe that problems can become solutions. Other species work with humans and suddenly find themselves accomplishing things they never thought possible." Minho felt something click in his mind. "That's it. That's how we help your people without making them feel like they're accepting charity." "What do you mean?" Ji Young asked. "We don't offer to save them," Minho said, his voice growing excited. "We ask them to help us solve a problem that happens to benefit both species." 3 days later, Minho stood before the Therian High Council in their most sacred chamber. The room was breathtaking, with walls that seemed to be carved from a single, enormous crystal. Light flowed through the structure in patterns that hurt his eyes to follow directly. 12 council members sat in a perfect circle around him, their pale blue faces unreadable. King Thelos occupied the highest seat, his expression stern and unwelcoming. Princess Aralyn sat with the other royal family members, but Minho was careful not to look at her directly. "Honored Council," Minho began, his voice echoing strangely in the crystal chamber. "I come before you today not as a supplicant, but as someone with a desperate need." This got their attention. Several council members leaned forward slightly. In all their diplomatic encounters, aliens usually came asking for things from the Therians, not the other way around. "Humanity stands at a crossroads," Minho continued, pulling up a holographic display. "Our expansion into deep space has reached a critical bottleneck. We can travel between stars, yes, but we cannot efficiently stabilize the stellar environments we encounter." The display showed images of human colonies struggling with solar radiation and unstable energy outputs from their local stars. "Our colonies suffer constant equipment failures due to stellar instability. Our people live in fear of solar flares. Our expansion has slowed to a crawl because we simply cannot master the art of stellar engineering." Elder Mordain, the oldest council member, spoke first. His voice was like grinding glass. "And what does this have to do with our people, human?" Minho took a deep breath. This was the crucial moment. We have developed theoretical technology for stellar stabilization. The mathematics work perfectly. Our computer models show it should function flawlessly. He paused for effect. But we cannot build it. Why not? Asked another council member. Because the focusing matrices required are beyond human manufacturing capabilities. We need crystal structures of perfect molecular alignment with precision tolerances that our technology cannot achieve. We need, he gestured toward the chamber walls, we need Therian crystal matrix technology. The council chamber fell silent. Minho could practically hear them thinking. King Thelos finally spoke. You are suggesting a trade arrangement. More than a trade, Minho replied. A scientific partnership. We provide you with stellar stabilization technology in exchange for Therian expertise in crystal matrix construction. Both species benefit equally. Elder Mordane's eyes narrowed. You would give us technology capable of manipulating stars themselves in exchange for what you call pretty crystals. This was the question Minho had been dreading. He needed to sell the value of Therian crystals without making it obvious how desperately humanity needed this particular exchange to work. Elder Mordane, with respect, your crystal technology is far more than decorative. Your energy-focusing capabilities are legendary throughout the galaxy. Human engineers have studied Therian crystal matrices for decades, trying to replicate even basic versions. Minho activated another holographic display showing complex technical diagrams. Without perfect crystal focusing arrays, our stellar stabilization technology is useless. We have the power source, we have the control systems, but we cannot direct the energy with sufficient precision. These crystals you speak of, said Councillor Velnara, a middle-aged Therian with intricate scarring on her arms. They are incredibly difficult to create. The process takes months of careful cultivation, which is exactly why we need Therian expertise, Minho replied quickly. Humans are excellent at building large, powerful systems, but we lack the patience and precision for the delicate work. So your people excel at. He could see some council members beginning to nod slightly. This was working, but Elder Mordane wasn't convinced. This seems remarkably convenient, human. Your people happen to have technology that solves stellar instability, and you just happen to need exactly what we can provide. Minho's heart pounded, but he kept his expression calm. Elder, humanity has been developing stellar stabilization technology for over 50 years. It's a natural progression of our expansion efforts. The timing may seem convenient, but from our perspective, this meeting is incredibly fortunate. Princess Aralyn spoke for the first time. Father, perhaps we should consider the technical specifications before making any decisions. King Thelos looked at his daughter with surprise. She rarely spoke during council sessions. The princess speaks wisdom, said Councillor Velnara. If their technology is genuine, this could advance Therian crystal sciences significantly. And if it is not genuine? Elder Mordane asked pointedly. Minho met his gaze directly. Then you lose nothing but time, and we lose our only hope of continuing human expansion into deep space. The council began murmuring among themselves in their native language. Minho couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the tone, shifting from skepticism to interest. Finally, King Thelos raised his hand for silence. We will consider your proposal, Ambassador Minho, but understand this. If you are attempting to deceive us, the consequences will be severe. I understand completely, Your Majesty. The council session had been going for 3 hours, and Minho could feel the tension growing thicker by the minute. Half the council members seemed interested in the proposal, while the other half remained deeply suspicious. Elder Mordane had been asking increasingly pointed questions about human motives, and King Thelos looked ready to end the discussion entirely. This technology you describe, Elder Mordane said for the 4th time, it seems far too advanced for such a young species to possess. Minho was about to respond when Princess Aralyn suddenly stood up. In the formal council chamber, this was completely unexpected. Royal family members were supposed to remain seated unless specifically addressed. Honored Council, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the crystal chamber. I invoke Velneth Kadari. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Every council member gasped. Some actually stood up from their seats. King Thelos went completely pale, his blue skin taking on an almost grey tint. Minho had no idea what was happening, but he could tell it was significant. "Aralyn," King Thelos said, his voice barely controlled. "You cannot be serious. I am completely serious, Father." Elder Mordain leaned forward, his ancient eyes wide with shock. "Princess, do you understand what you are invoking? Velneth Kadari has not been used in over 300 years. "I understand perfectly," Aralyn replied, and Minho noticed her hands weren't trembling anymore. She stood straight and confident, looking nothing like the nervous girl he'd first met. Prince Velhan, her elder brother, tried to interrupt. "Sister, this is madness. You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," Aralyn shot back, "which is more than I can say for the rest of you." King Thelos rose from his throne, towering over the chamber. "Explain yourself, daughter." Aralyn turned to face the full council. Velneth Kadari is an ancient law that allows any member of the royal bloodline to stake their entire inheritance on a single decision. If I am right, my voice in future council decisions will carry the weight of proven wisdom. If I am wrong, if you are wrong, you lose everything, Elder Mordain said gravely. Your title, your inheritance, your place in the royal family, you become nothing more than a common citizen. "I understand the stakes," Aralyn said firmly. Her sister, Princess Lyrani, stood up as well. "Aralyn, please reconsider. This human alliance could be a trick. You're risking your entire future for strangers." "They're not strangers," Aralyn replied. "I have studied their species for years. I know what they're capable of." King Thelos stepped down from his throne and approached his youngest daughter. Minho had never seen the Therian king look so angry. "You risk everything for these aliens?" he demanded, his voice rising. "You would throw away centuries of royal bloodline for creatures we barely know." Aralyn met her father's gaze without flinching. "I risk everything for our people." The simple statement hung in the air like a challenge. Minho realized that something fundamental had just changed in the room's dynamics. "Our people," King Thelos repeated. "What do you mean?" For the first time since the meeting began, Aralyn's bioluminescent markings started to glow. The soft light created patterns across her skin as she spoke with growing passion. "I mean, our people who will die if we do nothing. I mean our children who will never have the chance to grow up if our star collapses. I mean every Therian citizen who trusts us to make the right decisions for their future." She turned to address the full council. "You sit here debating pride and tradition while our world faces extinction. You worry about what other species might think of us while our sun grows more unstable every day." Elder Mordain tried to speak, but Aralyn continued. "The humans offer us a solution. Not charity, not pity, but a real partnership that benefits both species. And you hesitate because it might damage our reputation." King Thelos's anger seemed to deflate slightly. "Daughter, you don't understand the complexities." "I understand perfectly, Father. I understand that pride is a luxury we can no longer afford." The chamber fell completely silent. Even Minho held his breath, sensing that this moment would determine everything. Finally, Elder Mordain spoke. "The princess has invoked Velneth Kadari. By ancient law, we must respect her decision. The question now is whether the council will support her judgment." King Thelos looked at his daughter for a long moment. Minho could see the conflict in his expression, love for his child warring with anger at her defiance. "Very well," the king said finally. "But understand this, Aralyn. If this alliance fails, you will have sacrificed not just your own future, but potentially the dignity of our entire civilization." "And if it succeeds," Aralyn replied quietly, "our civilization will have a future at all." The joint laboratory was unlike anything either species had ever seen before. Human equipment hummed alongside Therian crystal formations in a space that seemed to blend two completely different approaches to science. Hyunwoo stood in the center of it all, watching, as his team tried to make sense of alien technology that defied everything they thought they knew about physics. "This is impossible," muttered Dayun, staring at a Therian crystal matrix that was somehow channeling energy in 3 dimensions simultaneously. "According to our calculations, this should have exploded the moment we turned it on." Kelina, the lead Therian scientist, made a sound that might have been laughter. Your calculations assume energy must follow straight paths. Our crystals convince energy to follow more interesting routes. Hyun-woo had been working with Kelina for 2 weeks now, and he was beginning to understand why the Therians had never developed space travel. They didn't think in terms of brute force solutions like humans did. Instead, they found elegant ways to make the universe cooperate with their goals. "Show me again how you grow these crystals," Hyun-woo said, approaching a formation that looked like frozen lightning. Kelina placed her hands on the crystal's surface. Her skin began to glow softly, and the crystal responded by shifting its internal structure. "We don't grow them exactly. We sing to them. Each crystal has its own frequency, its own personality." Tae-sung looked up from his workstation. "You're telling me these crystals are alive?" "Not alive in the way you understand," Kelina explained, "but they respond to intention, to emotion. A crystal grown with fear will always be brittle. A crystal grown with hope will bend rather than break." This was the kind of thinking that made Hyun-woo's engineering brain hurt. Human technology was predictable, logical, built on solid mathematical principles. Therian technology seemed to run on feelings and intuition, but somehow it worked. Master Johan, the eldest of the Therian crystal masters, approached their work area. He was ancient even by Therian standards, with skin so pale it was almost transparent. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "Young humans," he said, examining their latest attempt at a hybrid energy-focusing array. "You think too loudly." "I'm sorry?" Hyun-woo wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. "Your thoughts are very loud, very forceful. You try to make the crystals obey you." Johan gestured to their failed experiment. "Crystals do not obey. They cooperate." Da-in frowned. "But we're following the resonance patterns exactly as you showed us." "You follow the patterns, yes, but you do not trust them." Johan placed a weathered hand on the crystal array. "Watch." The crystal began to glow, but not with the harsh light of their previous attempts. This light was warm, gentle, almost musical in its quality. The energy flowed through the matrix like water finding its way downstream. "The difference," Johan continued, "is that I believe the crystal wants to work. You believe it wants to fail." Hyun-woo stared at the functioning array. That's actually working. The energy output is stable. The resonance patterns are perfect." "Of course it's working," Johan said with what might have been amusement. "Why would it not work?" Over the following days, something strange began to happen. The human team started to adopt the Therian approach to problem-solving. Instead of forcing solutions, they began to find creative alternatives, and the Therians, exposed to human enthusiasm and determination, started attempting projects they'd never considered possible. "I have an idea," Kelina announced one morning, her bioluminescent markings flickering with excitement. "What if we don't just stabilize your star? What if we make it better?" Tae-sung looked up from his calculations. "Better how?" "Your stellar stabilization technology corrects instabilities, yes? But our crystal matrices could potentially optimize the star's entire energy output. We could make it more efficient, more stable, longer lasting." Dayeon's eyes widened. "You're talking about stellar engineering on a scale that's never been attempted." "Exactly!" Kalina's excitement was infectious. "Therians have always been conservative, always afraid to try new things. But working with you humans, you make us believe impossible things are possible." Hyun-woo felt a chill run down his spine. "You're saying we're changing how you think?" "More than that," Johan said, joining their conversation. "You humans carry hope like a disease. It spreads to everyone around you. My people have spent centuries preparing for failure. You spend your time preparing for success. Within days, the joint team was working on projects that neither species had ever dreamed of attempting alone. The Therians began proposing ambitious modifications to their crystal technology. The humans started incorporating Therian intuition into their engineering processes. "This is remarkable," Hyun-woo told Min-ho during one of their evening briefings. "We're not just building hybrid technology, we're creating a hybrid way of thinking." "What do you mean?" "The Therians are starting to think like humans. They're becoming optimistic, taking risks, believing in possibilities instead of limitations, And we're learning from them too. Patience, precision, working with natural forces instead of against them. Minho nodded thoughtfully. Princess Aralyn mentioned something similar. She said human optimism was infectious. It's more than that, Hyunwoo replied. We're accidentally teaching an entire species to hope. The morning of the test, everyone in the palace seemed to be holding their breath. Hyunwoo and his team had spent the entire night making final adjustments to the stellar stabilizer, a device that looked like a massive crystal flower surrounded by human-built energy conduits. Princess Aralyn stood in the main observatory, staring at the viewing screen that showed their sun. To human eyes, it looked normal, a bright yellow star providing warmth and light to their world. But the instruments told a different story. Deep inside the star's core, catastrophic changes were building toward inevitable collapse. Deployment sequence initiated, announced Kalina from the control station. Her voice was steady, but Minho could see her hands trembling as she worked the controls. The stellar stabilizer had been launched 3 days ago, carried by a specially modified Therian vessel that could withstand the intense radiation near their star. Now it floated in position, ready to either save their world or fail spectacularly. Energy systems online, reported Taesung from his monitoring station. Crystal matrices are responding to the stellar magnetic field. Human propulsion systems are holding steady, added Da-un. We're getting clean readings across all sensors. But for all the technical readouts and status reports, everyone in the room knew that the real test was just beginning. The device had to not only reach the star, but actually change its fundamental behavior. No one had ever attempted stellar engineering on this scale. Princess Aralyn hadn't slept in 3 days. Her bioluminescent markings had been flickering, constantly creating anxious patterns of light across her skin. She stood perfectly still, watching the monitors, but Minho could see the exhaustion in her violet eyes. "Princess," he said quietly, approaching her position, "perhaps you should rest. We'll know the results soon enough." "I can't," she replied without taking her eyes off the screen. "If this fails, I lose everything. My title, my position, my future. But more than that, if this fails, my people die. Every single Therian in existence will be gone within 2 years, and it will be my fault for pushing this alliance." Minho stood beside her, also watching the screen. "You know humans have a saying about situations like this. What's that?" "We don't hope for miracles, we make them." Aralyn finally looked at him. "How can you be so confident? Your people always seem to believe everything will work out." "Because we've learned something over the centuries," Minho replied. "The universe doesn't care about our plans or our fears. It only responds to our actions. Right now, instead of hoping your star will stabilize, we're actively stabilizing it." "But what if we're wrong? What if the calculations are incorrect? Then we'll make new calculations and try again. That's what humans do. We keep trying until we succeed." As if responding to his words, the monitoring equipment began to show the first signs of change. The star's energy output fluctuated slightly, then began to steady. "I'm seeing core stabilization," Kalina announced, her voice filled with wonder. "The stellar magnetic field is realigning. Radiation levels are dropping," added Hyunwoo from his position. "The solar flare activity is decreasing." But the most dramatic change was visible on the main screen. The star itself seemed to be shifting, its surface becoming smoother, more stable. The violent solar storms that had been building for months were beginning to calm. "It's working," Aralyn whispered, her bioluminescent markings beginning to glow brighter. "It's actually working." "Of course it's working," Minho said with a smile. "Did you really think we'd come all this way just to fail?" For the next several hours, they watched as the stellar stabilizer continued its work. The hybrid technology was performing better than anyone had dared hope. Not only was it stopping the star's collapse, but it was actually improving the star's overall stability. "Look at these readings," Taesung called out excitedly. "The energy output is becoming more efficient. The star is going to last longer than it would have even before the instability began." "How is that possible?" asked Elder Mordain, who had been silently observing from the back of the room. "The Therian crystal matrices aren't just stabilizing the star," Hyunwoo explained. "They're optimizing it, making it run more smoothly, more efficiently. We accidentally created a stellar improvement system instead of just a stabilization device. Princess Aralyn turned to Minho, tears streaming down her face. We did it. We actually did it. You did it, Minho corrected. You had the courage to risk everything for your people. You brought two species together and created something neither could have achieved alone. But I couldn't have done it without human optimism, Aralyn replied. Your people taught mine how to believe in possibilities instead of preparing for disasters. As the celebrations began around them, Minho realized something profound had happened. They hadn't just saved a world. They had changed the fundamental relationship between two species, proving that cooperation could achieve what individual strength never could. The test was over. The miracle had been made. 1 week after the stellar stabilizer activated, the results were beyond anything anyone had imagined. The Therian star wasn't just stable, it was performing better than it had in centuries. Energy output had increased by 12% while becoming incredibly smooth and consistent. Solar flare activity had dropped to almost zero, but the real transformation was happening on the planet itself. Minho walked through the capital city and barely recognized it as the same place he'd arrived at weeks earlier. Therian citizens who had previously kept to themselves were now gathering in groups, excitedly discussing the success of the human-Therian collaboration. Street vendors were selling small crystal models of the stellar stabilizer. Children were playing games where they pretended to be human engineers, working alongside Therian crystal masters. It's incredible, Sojin told him as they observed a group of young Therians attempting to speak English with human technicians. The entire culture is shifting. They're asking questions about other species, about cooperation, about exploration, beyond their own world. The most dramatic change was in the scientific community. Therian researchers who had spent their careers focused on perfecting existing technologies were now proposing ambitious new projects. They wanted to build interstellar communication networks using hybrid human-Therian technology. They were designing crystal-enhanced space vessels. Some were even suggesting joint colonies on distant worlds. We never imagined such things were possible, Kerlina explained to Minho during one of their meetings. For generations, we believed that working with other species would weaken us. Now we see that it makes us stronger than we ever were alone. Master Yorhan, the ancient crystal master, had become particularly vocal about the transformation. In my lifetime, I have seen our people grow fearful and isolated, he told a gathering of young scientists. We built walls around our knowledge, convinced that sharing would diminish us. These humans have shown us that knowledge shared becomes knowledge multiplied. The political changes were just as dramatic. The High Council, which had spent decades debating minor policy adjustments, was now approving revolutionary proposals for interstellar cooperation. Elder Mordain, who had been the most skeptical about the human alliance, was now advocating for expanded diplomatic relations with other species. Perhaps, he admitted to Minho during a private conversation, our ancestors were wrong about the dangers of cooperation. Perhaps they were simply afraid of losing what made us special. What makes you special doesn't disappear when you share it, Minho replied. It spreads to others and comes back to you improved. But the most significant transformation was happening within the royal family itself. King Thelos had called for a formal ceremony in the Great Crystal Chamber. The same room where Princess Aralyn had invoked the ancient law was now filled with citizens, nobles, and dignitaries from across the planet. Minho and his team were given places of honor, but all eyes were focused on the royal family. My daughter risked everything for our people, King Thelos announced, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. She saw dangers that I was too proud to acknowledge. She found solutions that I was too stubborn to consider. The king stepped down from his throne and approached Princess Aralyn, who stood with her siblings in the center of the room. Aralyn of House Thelos, he said formally, you have proven your wisdom through actions, not words. You have saved our people through courage, not tradition. You have shown us that strength comes not from standing alone, but from choosing the right allies. He removed the royal crown from his own head, a delicate structure that seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. Therefore I name you my heir and successor. When my time comes to step aside, You will rule not just as queen, but as the leader who taught our people to reach beyond the stars." The chamber erupted in celebration. Therian citizens who had never seen their princess as anything more than the quiet one were now cheering for their future queen. The bioluminescent markings on Aralin's skin blazed with joy and pride, but she held up her hand for silence. "I accept this honor," she said, her voice no longer the whisper it had been when Minho first met her. "But I accept it with the understanding that our future lies not in isolation, but in cooperation, not in pride, but in partnership." She turned to look at Minho and his team. "The humans have shown us that impossible problems have solutions when different minds work together. They have taught us that hope is not weakness, it is the foundation of all progress." The celebration continued long into the night. Minho found himself surrounded by Therians, eager to learn more about human culture, human technology, and human philosophy. But more than anything, they wanted to understand how humans managed to stay optimistic in the face of seemingly impossible challenges. "The secret," Minho told them, "is that we don't see challenges as impossible. We see them as puzzles waiting to be solved." As he watched Therian children playing with human engineers, as he listened to scientists from both species planning joint research projects, Minho realized that they had accomplished something far more important than saving a single world. They had changed the way an entire civilization thought about the universe and their place in it. 6 months later, Queen Aralin's coronation was unlike any ceremony in Therian history. The Great Crystal Palace was filled not just with Therian nobles, but with representatives from dozens of species across the galaxy. The hall sparkled with translation devices as beings who had never spoken to each other before exchanged ideas and formed new partnerships. Minho stood beside the throne in his new role as the first human advisor to a Therian monarch. The position had been created specifically for him, recognizing that the alliance between their species was now permanent and essential. "I, Aralin of House Thelos, accept the crown of my ancestors," the new queen declared, her bioluminescent markings creating beautiful patterns of light across her skin. "But I also accept the responsibility to lead our people into a new age of cooperation and exploration." The crown itself had been modified for the ceremony. Traditional Therian crystals were now interwoven with human-designed energy conduits, creating a piece that represented both cultures. When placed on Aralin's head, it glowed with a warm light that seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. After the formal ceremony, Minho and the new queen retreated to a private balcony overlooking the construction site that had become the symbol of their alliance. In the distance, massive ships were assembling the framework for humanity's most ambitious project yet, a joint deep space colony that would serve as a stepping stone to the far reaches of the galaxy. "It's hard to believe how much has changed," Aralin said, watching human and Therian workers cooperating on the construction. "A year ago, my people wouldn't even consider leaving our homeworld. Now, we're building cities among the stars." The colony ship was a marvel of hybrid engineering. Human propulsion systems were integrated with Therian crystal technology to create vessels that could travel farther and faster than either species had achieved alone. The living quarters were designed to accommodate both human and Therian needs, while the research facilities promised to push the boundaries of science in ways neither species had imagined. "Your father seems to have accepted the changes well," Minho observed, noting how former King Thelos was actively participating in planning sessions with human engineers. "Better than accepted," Aralin replied with a smile. "Yesterday he asked me if we could arrange for Therian students to attend human universities. He wants our young people to learn what he calls human optimism as a formal subject." As they watched, a message beacon arrived from the outer colonies. Minho activated the holographic display, revealing the face of Captain Seojun, commander of the first joint exploration vessel. "Your Majesty, Ambassador," Seojun reported, his excitement clear even through the long-distance transmission. "We've made contact with the Zephyrian Trade Federation. They're requesting a meeting to discuss a 3-species alliance for asteroid mining operations." Aralin looked at Minho with amazement. 3 species working together? That would have been Unthinkable a year ago. It's not just the Zephyrians, Minho replied, pulling up additional messages. We've received cooperation requests from the Veltharian Research Collective, the Corvanian Defense League, and even the notoriously isolationist Altarian Empire. What are they all asking for? Minho smiled. They all want the same thing you originally asked for. They want to learn how humans approach problems. They've heard about our alliance, about how we turned your star crisis into an opportunity for advancement, and they want to understand how we do it. Queen Aralyn leaned against the balcony railing, her expression thoughtful. It's spreading, isn't it, this human way of thinking? What do you mean? The belief that every problem has a solution, the refusal to accept failure as final, the idea that cooperation makes everyone stronger rather than weaker. She paused, watching as human and Therian engineers celebrated solving some technical challenge together. A year ago, most species in the galaxy approached challenges by either fighting them or avoiding them. Now they're starting to ask, how can we turn this into an opportunity? Minho nodded. Hyunwoo calls it the solution virus, the way human optimism spreads to other species and changes how they think about problems. That's exactly what I needed from you, Aralyn said quietly. When I first approached you at that diplomatic dinner, I thought I needed your technology, your expertise, your help with our star. But what I really needed was something much more fundamental. What was that? Your refusal to accept the impossible. She turned to face him directly. Humans don't just solve problems. You make everyone around you believe that problems can be solved. You turn despair into hope, fear into curiosity, isolation into cooperation. As if to emphasize her point, another message arrived. This time it was from a species Minho had never heard of, the Netherians from the far rim of the galaxy. They were facing a planetary drought and had heard about the Human-Therian alliance. They wanted to know if the partnership would consider helping them turn their desert world into something habitable. 6 months ago, that would have been an impossible request, Aralyn observed. Now it's just another interesting problem to solve, Minho finished. They stood in comfortable silence watching the colony ship take shape against the backdrop of stars. The vessel represented more than just a single project. It was proof that different species could work together to achieve things none of them could accomplish alone. The galaxy is changing, Queen Aralyn said finally. Species that haven't spoken to each other in centuries are forming alliances. Civilizations that were dying are finding new hope. Worlds that seemed doomed are discovering solutions. And it all started with a shy princess who had the courage to whisper a request to a human ambassador. Minho replied. Aralyn's bioluminescent markings pulsed with warm light. The galaxy would never be the same. She was right. Across the stars, the Human-Therian alliance had become a symbol of what was possible when different species chose cooperation over competition, hope over fear, and solutions over surrender. The age of human expansion was becoming the age of galactic cooperation, and it was only the beginning.